GasWork.com. Thank you for attending our webinar, The Anesthesia Chief's Journey, Two Different Paths, One Destination, sponsored by GasWork.com and Somnia Anesthesia. Today our discussion will focus on two chiefs' different career journeys. Please note that all registrants will be emailed a recording of today's presentation by the end of the week. Joining us today is Dr. Robert Karpanos, Chief of Anesthesia at St. Barnabas Hospital in the Bronx, New York, and Dr. Frank Schramm, Chief of Anesthesia at Providence Regional Medical Center in Everett, Washington. Dr. Karpanos was named Chief of Anesthesiology at St. Barnabas Hospital in January of 2013. Dr. Karpanos is responsible for managing and leading the anesthesia team at the hospital where his clinical leadership proves invaluable. Dr. Karpanos, who most recently practiced at Hackensack University Medical Center in New Jersey, has 20 years of clinical practice experience at major healthcare facilities in New York and New Jersey. In addition to his medical background, Dr. Karpanos held positions as Assistant Professor of Anesthesiology at the Turno University College of Medicine and as clinical instructor in the Department of Anesthesiology at the University of Medicine and Dentistry in New Jersey. Most recently, he worked as the clinical leader of the Division of Vascular Anesthesiology at Hackensack University Medical Center. Dr. Schramm is the Chief of Anesthesiology at Providence Regional Medical Center in Everett, Washington. Dr. Schramm received his medical degree from the University of Miami and completed his residency in anesthesia at the University of Washington. Prior to joining the Somnia Anesthesia team, he was a managing partner in an anesthesiology private practice in Las Vegas. He's been working with Somnia for about 5 years and manages more than 50 providers in one of the top hospitals in Washington State. Both anesthesiologists have more than 25 years of clinical and leadership experience. Now, before Dr. Karpanos begins his presentation, here's a quick rundown of today's agenda. First, each chief will review the highlights of their early careers. Next, each chief will discuss important milestones along two different paths the doctors took to become chiefs. Each chief will then talk about his current role as chief at their respective institutions. Finally, we'll wrap up with a question and answer session, which is available to all attendees by submitting a question at the top right of your webinar screen. Now, without further ado, here's Dr. Karpanos, Chief of Anesthesia at St. Barnabas Hospital, who will discuss the journey to becoming a chief. Dr. Karpanos?
Thank you, Dr. Martin. As Dr. Martin pointed out, my name is Rob Karpanos, and I'm the Chief of Anesthesia and Perioperative Services at St. Barnabas Hospital in the Bronx, New York. First, a little bit about St. Barnabas. We are a 461-bed acute, chronic, and ongoing care community hospital. The hospital was founded in 1866, where it was originally known as the home of the incurables. This is where people with contagious diseases like leprosy and tuberculosis and maybe even today's Ebola would have been sent. And it gets its name from the patron saint for healing, St. Barnabas. We are indeed a level 1 trauma center, and we are a New York State designated stroke and AIDS center. We're quite proud to have been ranked in the top 50 hospitals in the country by U.S. News & World Report just last year. And as of June 2014, we had 1,300 inpatient surgeries and just over 500,000 outpatient visits, along with just over 4,000 total operative cases. Next slide. Next slide, please. If we look back to where my career journey began, I did my anesthesia training at New York University Medical Center, which included Bellevue Hospital, the largest health and hospitals corporation institution in New York, NYU's University Medical Center, as well as the Manhattan VA and several other smaller specialty hospitals. At NYU, I served for 1 year as the chief resident, where I really learned the job of the chief resident, and often the chief of a department is filled with responsibility. And while the chief of the department may have some authorities, the chief resident, unfortunately, usually doesn't have many. In this position, it was critical to learn to be impartial and make decisions that really were global and worked best for everyone, and ultimately considered the long-term good of the residency, the department, and the institution. Next slide. After residency, I went directly to Hackensack University Medical Center. At the time when I went there, Hackensack was a small community hospital, very similar to St. Barnabas, only about 400 active beds. And through the 18 years that I was an attending anesthesiologist, I watched the institution grow to a real giant in the industry. I served as the educational coordinator and director for the divisions of critical care and recovery room anesthesia, as well as the division head, or liaison as we called it, for thoracic and vascular anesthesia. Directing so many divisions, I was referred to as the medical director and responsible for much, if not all, of the QA and PI, and many of the other divisions filtered through me before advancing to the chief with their issues and desires. Next slide. In my current position as Chief of Anesthesiology at St. Barnabas Hospital, I was appointed Medical Director for Perioperative Services in 2014. Somnia's Anesthesiologist of the Year was an honor bestowed upon me. And when we talk about how did I get where I am now, I think it comes from being recognized as demonstrating consistently several qualities. Primary among them is sound reasoning and a commitment to the patients primarily, but also the staff and the institution as a greater whole. I was recognized consistently by my superiors, my peers, and the people that reported to me as really possessing what we call the 3 A's, which are affability, availability, and ability. I functioned largely as a resource for everyone in the perioperative community. The way I viewed my role was to lead by example, sometimes from the front, leading initiatives and leading changes, and sometimes from the back, supporting others who are leading and developing their initiatives and goals. Next slide. If we look at my current responsibilities, not only do I have my responsibilities as a chief of service, but I feel it's very important to maintain my clinical caseload and really, again, lead by example. I take call like everyone else. I find it incredibly important for me to be involved in the day-to-day activities of the operating room, to understand the stress and the rewards that each of us anesthesiologists has the opportunity to partake in and suffer through. And if I suffer through them, then I'm much more aware of what they are, and I can make the necessary changes to make life better for the entire team. I get the responsibility of managing the OR schedule and overseeing not only my cases, but all the cases. Each clinical decision, each outcome, not only rests in the individual provider, but ultimately rests with me as well. I need to make sure that each anesthesiologist is comfortable with the cases that he's doing and the patients that he's taking care of. How do we do that? Well, it comes down to the daily schedule. It comes to having a broad overview of the surgeons, the anesthesiologists, what their relationships are, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, likes and dislikes, and pairing those things together so that each patient gets the best experience by having the best team in the room. Continuing with the concept of being fair and equitable and making sure that my team is well served, I make the vacation schedule and I manage the call schedule as well, where the goal is really to keep things balanced, to keep the staff happy at all times, and keep things fair and equitable. In order to maintain the staff, we have to consider things like recruitment and retention. As a chief, I find it very important for the recruitment process, to maintain an active lecture schedule, to participate in every teaching opportunity. We speak at grand rounds. We speak with other department heads and department head meetings and directors. We'll frequently round outside of the operating room. And we participate in the educational programs going on at the institution with the medical students as well. Not only is recruitment important, but retention is also very important. And we work very closely with Somnia's recruiting department in order to source candidates, vet their qualifications, and make sure that we hire the best possible applicants with the best fit for our institution. Now that we have an active chief taking clinical and call responsibilities, managing a daily schedule, managing a monthly schedule, working on recruitment, the next part of the process, not in any specific order, but another part of the process is to be incredibly involved in the hospital. This requires multiple committees, active roles in each committee and each department. It's not just sitting around a board table and raising your hands along with the conjunction or the majority of the group. It's actually taking a leadership role or a participatory role in those committees. The example would be, as part of the transfusion committee, the Department of Anesthesia and myself lead the blood management committee. As part of the peer review committee, and a subset of that peer review committee, we participate actively and work heavily with the clinical guidelines. By doing this, we not only get out, get seen, we can network incredibly, we can meet and interact with the other divisions and departments, and we become an integral part of the hospital. Next slide. So when asked what makes a good leader, I guess I look at the other leaders in the department as well as myself, and I look for people who are expert at their craft, people who do a really great job, who understand what they're doing, who are able to teach others what they're doing. These are your clinical leaders. We look for people who are consistently reliable, who are honest, who are not afraid to say, I don't know. People that will be there when you need them. As a leader myself, I need to be incredibly flexible and at the same time reliable. I need to be able to provide a service not only for myself but for my department, and I need to be able to adjust my schedule and the department's schedule in order to meet the needs of the institution. Tactfulness is a must. We need to be able to communicate effectively to get our point across and to really make people feel good about the decisions that are being made. We need to function as a role model and a mentor, and I think that goes right along with being an educator. We need to display confidence and decisiveness, but we also need to go back to flexibility and honesty. I think one of the key things that you identify in a leader is not only the commitment to get things done, but the actual follow-through and getting things done. Implementation of ideas is necessary in order for those ideas to have any value. And ultimately, I think as we talked about in the schedule making and the management of the daily OR, we need to be aware of the forest as well as the trees. We need to take into consideration each person's specific needs, desires, skill set, strengths and weaknesses, and blend them into the OR and the department as the forest in order to make everything grow well. Next slide. Leadership skills that were learned along the way for me, well, objectivity and the ability to see others' perspectives and others' point of views was something that I learned early on and has served me incredibly well. We need to be fair. There's really nothing like going to somebody when you have an issue or a problem and you know their answer beforehand because they're always biased. It doesn't do anybody any good. We need to be objective. We need to be fair. We need to resolve conflicts in a way where everyone feels good about the resolution. So in that conflict resolution, again, we need to be objective and fair, and we need to present it in a manner that's tactful. We need to adapt to every condition and every circumstance, and I think a lot of that goes to our ability to organize and reorganize along the way. Next slide. Advice. If I had some advice, given the experience that I've gained from myself and my colleagues, I would say be an expert in your own craft and beyond. Don't limit yourself to just north of the blood-brain barrier. Know what's going on in the operating room. Know what's going on around you. I think the best anesthesiologist will understand what the surgeon needs and provide it before he asks. This is something that's recognized by our surgical colleagues, and it's recognized outside of the operating room. We need to demonstrate a willingness to make personal sacrifice. I take all the sick call. If somebody is unable to come in for a day or unable to take their call responsibility, I'm the first one who will volunteer to come in and take over those positions. I think that goes a long way to the team having confidence in their leader and knowing that I'm not going to ask them to do something that I wouldn't do, that I actually do myself. You have to be visibly involved around the hospital as much as possible. You can't hide in the OR. You have to have the leadership as well as the whole team out in the hospital, involved in as many hospital activities as possible. Send the anesthesiologists up to round in the ICU. Come out to the hospital picnic. Support the Employee Recognition Day. These are great ways to be seen by the administration and the staff, and it sends a positive message. I think it's incredibly important to love what you do. I've never gone to work a day in my life. I absolutely love what I do. I wouldn't give it up for anything, and it makes it easy for me to do what I do every day. I think it plays incredibly well into the next bullet, which is the more you do well, the more you'll be asked to do. If you love what you do, you're going to do a great job. People recognize it, and they ask you to do more. Next slide. Be involved in the hospital infrastructure. In order to plant those deep roots, you have to be at the ground level. It's important to know where the hospital is, where it's going, where it's been, and predict the future. If you're part of the infrastructure, you become necessary for the hospital to move forward, and that's, I think, vital to the survival of an anesthesia department. Never bring a problem without a solution. Nobody likes a complainer. Everybody loves a problem solver. So when there's an issue and there's something that comes up that needs adjustment, I think it brings tremendous confidence to your leaders, your peers, and even the people who report to you to see you identify that problem and bring a solution with you to the table. Acquire the qualities that you want to see in your chief of anesthesia. This was something that was taught to me at a very early time in my career. The concept was really, it starts as an anesthesiologist. Take the qualities that you see as good qualities in each attending, make them part of your repertoire. Take the qualities that you don't necessarily think are as good and eliminate them from your repertoire. Never want anything too badly. We all know those people that try too hard. You want to do a good job. You want to get the job done well. You want to be recognized for it. But don't break your arm patting yourself on the back, and don't overplay. If you want to be a chief, act like a chief. Take the responsibility, get the job done, get it done well, and be effective. I think that concludes my session, and I'd like to introduce Dr. Frank Schramm.
Thanks, Rob. My name is Frank Schramm. I'm the Chief of Anesthesiology at Providence Regional Medical Center in Everett, Washington. Next slide, please. Providence Regional Medical Center is a 491-bed full-service medical center. It is considered to be the flagship hospital of Providence Health and Services, a system associated with 32 to 34 hospitals, depending on the size that one includes. It is the largest faith-based healthcare system in the northwestern United States. It has been ranked among the 100 best hospitals in America by Becker's Hospital Review. As of June 2014, we had provided anesthetics for 8,600 inpatient surgeries, and there were 574,673 outpatient visits to our facility. In addition, we have the busiest emergency room in the state of Washington and the third busiest labor and delivery service. Next slide, please. As far as my early career is concerned, I started off on a pathway that was somewhat different than most. I'm a board-certified internist. I practiced in the military for 6 years. During that time, I was the director of medicine at my hospital. Subsequent to leaving the military, I chose to change career paths and went to the University of Washington in Seattle for my residency in anesthesiology. Next slide, please. Subsequent to graduating from the University of Washington, I relocated to Las Vegas, Nevada, a very vibrant and growing city with a great deal of opportunity from a medical standpoint. I joined a 10-person practice there, which was quite busy. I stayed there for 17 years, having left just about 6 years ago now. The last 7 years of my tenure there, I was the managing partner of our practice, and I was on staff at multiple hospitals and ambulatory surgery centers. I also served on several anesthesia quality committees at those hospitals. The style of practice in that area is consult-based, and so we traveled with our surgeons from hospital to hospital, resulting in a significant logistical issues associated with day-to-day scheduling and on-the-fly changes to that schedule. After I had been there for the 17 years, I really felt that I wanted to increase my responsibilities and to branch out into more of a managerial type of practice, and also to work with others in the operating room. When you're in private practice, you very rarely are able to see how your partners practice or to practice with another anesthesiologist. I was looking for increased teaching opportunity as well, and for an opportunity to work with others in the OR in both a teaching and collegial capacity. Next slide, please. My current position, as I mentioned, I am the Chief of Anesthesiology, or the Medical Director of the Department of Anesthesiology. And I suppose I have asked myself, how did I end up in this position? And I think part of it was the fact that it was recognized that I had some skills that I had learned during the management of my practice in Las Vegas, an acute need for organizational skills, and an understanding of the needs of the institution, and the many pieces that go into making a functioning anesthesia practice, and the ability to manage the logistics of coverage. As I mentioned, ours was a very busy practice with many moving parts, not dissimilar to what happens when managing an operating room. And also, I think it was important that I had the ability to accurately decide types of assignments based on patient need and provider ability, having had the experience that allowed me to, I think, gauge the ability and scope of an individual provider. Next slide, please. My current responsibilities include the management of more than 50 providers, including a vice chief, an OB chief, and a chief of cardiac anesthesia. I work clinically about 60 to 70% of the time. The remainder of that time is administrative. On my clinical days, I oversee the day-to-day operations of the anesthesia department, the operating room, and function as the anesthesia coordinator in most cases. I take call along with the rest of the practice in the same measure, regardless of my clinical commitment. And as Dr. Karpanos mentioned, I think that's very important in terms of having, for lack of a better term, street cred with the folks that you're working with. I manage the anesthesia team schedule, coverage, sick time, and vacation time, along with our administrator, Karen Garnall, and as well as the call schedule. We spend a great deal of time involved in quality metrics and reporting, both to the hospital and Somnia. We have a very robust quality program with very involved self-reporting by our providers. Also, in fact, actively involved in the recruitment process associated with our practice, and we have been attempting to partner with various residency programs to identify future members of our department and to offer mentoring programs as well. Work closely with the surgical nursing teams to ensure seamless patient care, and participate in state and national associating meetings and committee. Also attend committee meetings as the chair and as a participant. Next slide, please. The current committees to which I belong include the Department of Anesthesiology's Quality Review Committee, which I chair. I'm currently the chair of the Credentials Committee of the hospital. I sit on the Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee, the Critical Care Committee, the Sepsis Quality Committee, the Trauma Committee and the Trauma Quality Committee, as well as the Blood Transfusion or Blood Management Committee, Surgical Quality Review Committee, and the Medical Directors Council of the hospital. Next slide, please. The challenges associated with being the chief of a department are varied. And I tell people it's a job that can be as difficult as you want it to be, but inherently it is complex. It is a complex environment. There are many moving parts, simultaneous actions occurring in various campuses, various environments throughout the hospital. The hospital demands consistently high quality, as do I, of our practitioners. It's also important, I think, as the chief of the department, to maintain the hospital's awareness of your departments, the anesthesia department's participation and contribution in the hospital as a whole. It's equally important that the chief of anesthesia maintain the sense of engagement with the anesthesia providers, that they understand how important they are to the functioning of the hospital and how valued their participation is. Next slide, please. So as far as career lessons are concerned, I think it's important to understand that to be a leader in a large practice, you have to start small and work your way up. It is an almost exponential growth in terms of complexity and potential pitfalls as a practice grows. It's inherently it's important to maintain communication and flexibility throughout the day, because there are inherent risks to not having adequate communication, which can potentially be disastrous. As I mentioned, there are a lot of moving parts. Not only is it necessary that you understand how the operating works, you also have to understand the revenue cycle, billing, human resources, insurance contracts, scheduling, any number of things. You are expected to at least be versed in how these things impact your practice. It's also important to keep in mind the logistical challenges that you face versus the needs of the surgeons in the facilities. Sometimes they're at odds and sometimes they're aligned. It's your job to solve the problems as they arrive. Unfortunately, sometimes this does involve last-minute decision-making of a critical nature, and the ability to make those decisions is a skill that one gains with time. It's also obviously important that one has organizational skills. It's very important to be able to delegate responsibilities, because it's really difficult for one person to maintain all of the balls in the air at all times. So it's very important to understand who your future leaders are in your practice and to help them rise up through the ranks. It's important to recognize and reward folks that take on additional responsibility. Next slide. So, I was asked the question, what makes a good leader? And I was asked to give 10 qualities. And these are not listed in any particular order. I think they're all very important. I do think that a leader has to be empathetic. You have to be able to identify with the folks who work with and for you. Part of that, of course, is being a good listener. For me, at least, it was difficult to learn not to interrupt, to wait until someone has finished saying their piece. It's also very important to be continuously mindful of your own surroundings, how you fit into the hospital, how you fit into your own practice, and how the practice fits into the greater scheme of the hospital itself. It's also very important to have a built-in barometer of the well-being, the sense of well-being of those in your practice. As Dr. Karpanos mentioned, I think fairness is of paramount importance. Any form of partiality or equivocation is viewed as being arbitrary and is to be discouraged at all costs. The other thing is you have to be available. My phone is on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to anyone in the hospital or anyone in my practice who wants to call me. And of course that means that you're approachable. If you're approachable, they will call you. You will know about the problems. You can't turn a deaf ear no matter how insignificant the concern seems to be, because it can grow into a significant concern if it's not dealt with early. In addition, I agree that accountability is a very, very important factor or quality for a leader. I am responsible for my actions. I am responsible for the actions of every member of this practice. In addition, I think it's very important that people can expect a reliable response to similar situations and also a reliable response to unique situations. It's important that you be nimble and able to make clinical decisions rapidly and confidently. It's also, I think, important to understand that you serve the people that you are leading. So if you're the boss of 50 people, the fact of the matter is you have 50 bosses, and every one of them should have your ear. Next slide, please. So when asked to give advice, I really loathe giving advice, but I'm happy to share what I consider to be lessons that I've learned. It's important to understand that rank, as we have heard, has its privileges. However, I will tell you, rank has its responsibilities. Privileges should be the last thing on your mind if you're a leader. It's also very important to make sure that you balance your presence at the hospital. And when I'm talking about between clinical and non-clinical, you have to be in the operating rooms. You have to be a clinical presence. You have to be on a first-name basis with all of the people you work with, the charge nurses, the night charge nurse, the weekend charge nurse, the people who make the schedule, the people who procure equipment for the operating room. It is very important that you understand where your department fits into the hospital as a whole. And in addition to that, of course, is the issue of time commitment. Most people look at a full-time position as being between 55 and 60 hours. As a chief, you can reliably expect, especially early on this point, to spend between 75 and 100 hours a week. Now, of course, that should improve as your policies and procedures are enacted, as you feel more comfortable relinquishing responsibility to others. But initially, you should expect a very significant time commitment. In addition, it's imperative that you keep your finger on the pulse of the hospital. Cultivate your resources and sources throughout the hospital and procure timely information and vet it whenever possible. It's also very important to understand the hospital's command structure and the wants and needs of the facility and other departments. As far as being a part of the solution is concerned, you should always come to the table with the ability to identify solutions to problems. And if you're going to bring a problem to the table, have at least one or two solutions ready at hand. They may not be the solutions that are enacted, but in most cases it will be an amalgam of that solution with someone else's. As I mentioned before, you also have to be willing to sacrifice 25 to 30%, I'm sorry, there's a little typo there, 25 to 30% to non-clinical activities. And those non-clinical activities are not the typical rewards of the operating room that we see as anesthesiologists. They're not as tangible. They take longer to grow, and they take longer to come to fruit, if you will. They're still very necessary to maintain a strong clinical presence for the remainder of your group in the hospital. Next slide, please. I'd like to introduce Paul Martin, MD, who will be hosting our question and answer session.
Well, I'd like to thank Dr. Schramm and Dr. Karpanos for their insightful presentations. We appreciate your valuable time in sharing each of your stories with us. All attendees of today's webinar will be emailed a copy of this presentation in the next few days. If you should have any questions about today's presentation, please email marketing@somniainc.com. Now we'd like to answer the questions submitted by your listeners. The first question we have is for Dr. Karpanos. Dr. Karpanos, a candidate asks, in addition to my medical training, what additional education do you feel would be important for an anesthesiologist to have in order to become a chief?
Thanks, Dr. Martin. That's a great question. You know, in my experience and that of the vast majority of the residents that I've trained, there's very little training or education given to the business of medicine or the business of anesthesia. You know, I think Frank would probably agree that having some background in business administration, even something as simple as the CBA course offered by the American Society of Anesthesiologists, where you get a feel and a flavor for staffing requirements, understanding what CPT codes are and the value of including them into a booking schedule. Even things like adjusting salaries for the demographic that you're in. I think some of these things are incredibly important to understand as a chief. It gives you insight and understanding into what the market is and how to respond to the applicants and the people that work with you and for you. So that's something that I found very valuable in my educational experience other than medicine.
Thank you, Dr. Karpanos. Here's a question for Dr. Schramm. Dr. Schramm, you have experience working in both the ambulatory and the hospital setting. What are the main challenges in making that transition, and how would you describe the differences between the two? In addition, how did that setting prepare you to become a chief today?
Thank you, Paul. You know, I think the most important thing about you know, my career in terms of having worked in varied settings on a daily basis is the fact that it does give you a sense of ability when it comes to changing gears very quickly. And I think that that would be some advice that I would give to someone who was looking to become a chief, is to broaden your horizons, work in multiple settings. I would recommend both the ambulatory surgery setting as well as the acute inpatient setting. Either one by itself, probably not the best preparation for being a chief, because almost every hospital is going to have an ambulatory surgery center associated with it. The management associated with ambulatory surgery is very different. The goals are very different, and I think it's a significant enough difference that it's important that you be versed in those differences. And in addition, I think that with the changing pay structure that we see from Medicare and other payers regarding outpatient services, we're going to start to see more facilities opening outpatient centers. And again, the management of those centers is very different than the inpatient setting. As I mentioned, the goals are also very different. And so that kind of experience will stand you in good stead in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Schramm. Here's another question for Dr. Karpanos. The candidate asks, in your experience, what has been the chief's relationship with hospital executives?
Thanks, Paul. You know, I can speak from my own experience and from that of the chiefs that I've had before me. I think that relationship is critical. The chiefs that I learned from always had a fabulous relationship with the hospital executives, whether it be as the incredible, involved anesthesiologist and director of a department or the operating room, all the way through running fundraising committees for the hospital in general. The more that the hospital executives find the chief of anesthesia as somebody that they can go to as a real reliable source, someone that they can see as a confidant who will advise them with honest and forthright opinions and direction, the stronger that relationship comes, and the better the roots that the Department of Anesthesia plants within the hospital. The real goal is to make yourself indispensable, and one of the ways to do that is to become indispensable to the hospital's executives.
Thank you, Dr. Karpanos. Dr. Schramm, here's another question from an anesthesiologist. He says, what reaction have you seen from other MDs and CRNAs when a chief is promoted from within?
Well, I personally think that promotion from within is the best method. I think, engenders a certain sense of security for the members of the practice. It does point out to them that advancement is possible. And in general, this person who's being promoted will have been a role model. And such a person is not promoted in a vacuum, typically. I don't want to say that I search for consensus, but when I promote someone from within, I do so after having assessed the impact that will have on the other providers and what their overall sense of appropriateness is regarding that promotion. Obviously, as I mentioned, you can't run a practice by consensus, but clearly it is helpful if you have grassroots support in such a decision.
Well, thank you, Dr. Schramm. And here's a final question for Dr. Karpanos. What immediate action did you take to establish yourself once you were awarded the chief's position? What did you do differently from your predecessor?
Well, I had a very interesting beginning of my term as chief. I came on approximately January 13th, and on January 14th, the CMS came into the hospital for a visit and immediately wanted to review the Department of Anesthesia, specifically moderate sedation. So I had to, unfortunately, the policy was in process when I came on and hadn't been completed. So I had to, in a very short period of time, like hours, firm up and complete a policy that I was completely unfamiliar with, although I have familiarity with moderate sedation, get the approval of the committee that had been building that policy, and present it forward as if it was my own for people who make a living by inspecting departments. So I had my my bar set high and my wheels spinning the minute I hit the ground. In terms of what I did differently from my predecessor, I think one of the points that Frank made earlier is what I took home when I evaluated what my predecessor had done well and what he had done less well. And that information came from the staff and the department. I made myself available. I made myself here. 75 to 100 hours, I think that's realistic for a new chief. I spent every minute of every day, most weekends, late nights, here, working on policies, working on procedures, working on clinical application, not just behind the door at the typewriter, but out in the hallways, building up the team by physically being here and physically being available. My number is, as Frank's, available 24/7 to anyone and everyone in the institution. And my guys use it. I think they welcome it as a change from the previous chief, who was a little more aloof, a little more difficult to get in touch with. They call me all the time about important things, less important things, just to get an opinion, sometimes just to chat. And I think that makes all the difference in the world for my team.
Well, thank you, Dr. Karpanos. Here's a final question from an anesthesiologist to Dr. Schramm. He says, where do you go from here? In addition, how do you continue to elevate your current position?
Well, in all honesty, I'm not as concerned about elevating my own position as I am helping other people in the practice to elevate theirs. Obviously, I can't be here forever, and I think it's very important that one views a practice in an organic way. It goes on, and I think all of us would like to leave something of a legacy, and so at some point in the distant future, when I retire, I would like to believe that the folks that have been moved into positions of authority and responsibility will continue to strive to improve the quality of care that we deliver to our patients, strive to improve our relationships with the hospital on a daily basis. As Rob pointed out, I think the hospital should look around and wonder how they ever functioned without us. So I view that as my path from this point forward.
Well, that's good. Now, it looks like we're out of time. I want to thank all of you for participating in today's webinar. For more information about GasWork.com, please visit us at gaswork.com. Remember, it's gaswork.com, not gasworks.com. In addition, you can visit somniainc.com for additional career tips, such as Somnia's anesthesia resource, 10 tips for a successful interview. To learn more about Somnia's careers, please visit somniainc.com/careers or email the recruitment team at recruitment@somniainc.com. Thank you. We wish you a happy afternoon.